Hey writers, Lee Jessup, career coach for emerging and professional screenwriters, as well as screenwriting professor for the David Lynch grad program for cinematic arts. Coming at you today with a bit of a recent oral history of the evolution of screenwriting, or the screenwriting landscape, if you will. If any of you have been to my talks ever, you know that I tend to talk a lot about the broad history of screenwriting, how we became what it is today. But we also hear a lot about where we are now, the state of the industry and screenwriting. If you are trying to break into screenwriting, it's incredibly important to understand the space that you are trying to break into. I'm not going to go into the long, nearly 100-year history of screenwriters as studio writers, et cetera. But I do want to talk about recent history because I do think that it has a huge impact on the prospects for screenwriters coming into the industry. And it's important that writers understand the recent past in order to understand where we are right now as an industry and how it pertains to you. You are not writing in a void. You are not trying to break into a static industry. And so understanding the dynamics are important. With that in mind, I wanted to go all the way back to 2019 because I feel like that was really the marker of the start of some challenges that writers have faced over recent years, and some friction between writers and industry that have gone on. It doesn't mean that writers are not respected, beloved, appreciated for what they do. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. That is very much on a per case basis. But I think it's really important to look at this last 6-year chunk as an oral history to understand where we are today. So, 2019. Writers en masse fired their agents. The reason this happened is because the agents who work under the ATA, the Association for Talent Agencies, had a franchise agreement with the WGA in which there are some practices that the WGA found to be not favorable to writers. Not wrong. Those two practices were a 3% packaging fee on all packages for movies and TV shows put together by a particular agency. So the agency would get a lump sum off of budget or episode cost, episode budget from every show and movie that they put together. The other was affiliated productions. So agencies having their own production companies, which creates a conflict, right? Because if you are both the seller and the buyer and you are negotiating for a writer, that creates some conflicts, to say the least. Ultimately, this action was launched in April of 2019, at which point writers at large migrated to managers if they didn't have those already, as well as entertainment lawyers to help them with representation while their agents were not being engaged. Some agencies like Verve came on really fast and signed a new agreement and were able to pick up some big name writers such as John August during that time. Other agencies took much longer and truly didn't come to the table until COVID changed the direction of things, which brings us to 2020, right? March 2020, COVID begins. We begin all the practices that we all know and not love so much that we took on during the pandemic, but it also affected production heavily, especially in the beginning, where it was really unclear how we proceed with production, what that looks like producing content. What that did do is that the one sector of entertainment professional that was able to continue working was a writer. Right, writers were writing alone at home. Animators had some freedom, voiceover artists as well, but writers were able to sit at home and write, and that really made an impact on the 2019 move against the ATA. Those agencies, the big agencies that hadn't come to the table previously, now ultimately finished their new deals with the WGA, and so we found ourselves facing COVID, facing shutdown. In 2020, there was expected to be a writer's strike, but because production had already halted, nobody wanted to be, the bad guy in that scenario and cause more stoppage to what was already devastating. And so the writer's strike that was initially anticipated for 2020, of course, there's never a writer's strike until the WGA membership votes for that strike and negotiations don't come to a resolution, and therefore the guild decides to move forward into a strike empowered by their voting body. There was expected to be a strike in 2020. That did not happen because of the pandemic. We started coming out of the pandemic in 2021 into 2022, where things were already kind of back to business. In truth, we saw things starting to shoot again in the second half of 2020 as things were figured out. But it was a kind of slow coming back together at that point. Writers' rooms on the TV side went into Zoom rooms. There were less in-person rooms because of the pandemic. It certainly shifted the way that we do business, which for the record has shifted back specifically on the TV writing side, where we're seeing a lot more writers' rooms. We're also going back to more in-person meetings, though since the pandemic, most initial meetings that you're going to have in the industry are likely going to be over Zoom. Very few of them are going to take place in person. I've talked to friends in representation that have told me that ever since the pandemic, they will do initial meetings on Zoom, and then if they really like the person, they will try to meet in person if the person is indeed in Los Angeles. But the pandemic really changed the way that we do business, in that writers have to be in Los Angeles less than they have before, specifically if they're not writing for television. If you are writing television, we are going back quite heavily into in-person rooms that can have some Zoom component to it. But I was talking to a writer of mine a week ago who's in a big room for a network show, who does have one writer in that room who Zooms in and is not in the room with everybody else. Granted, it's an upper level writer with pre-existing relationships on the show that facilitated that. If you want to be in a writer's room, being in LA is going to be important now, because post-pandemic, we have come back to it. Writers really suffered through those Zoom rooms. It's very difficult to be on a Zoom room for hours, or in a Zoom room for hours on end. It caused a whole bunch of challenges. So we did see rooms go back to in-person rooms in some capacity. Like I said, there can be like 2 days on, 3 days off, whatever it is, but you are going to be expected to be in Los Angeles. It did impact greatly whether as a TV writer or as a feature writer, or as an emerging writer, you have to have a footprint in Los Angeles on a permanent or semi-permanent basis. And I think that has certainly been altered. I can tell you that I work with writers who work with managers that have not yet met in person, even though they've been working together for a while. We've also seen some managers make the move to New York, Chicago, wherever it might be. I'm generally still a believer that if you are a literary representative, you want to be in LA or New York. Are there exceptions to the rule? Of course, but in general, I feel that you have to be industry connected. And I do find that people in the industry do a lot more of the breakfast, lunch, dinner, drinks that we did pre-pandemic and certainly pre-WGA strike. Which brings us to 2023, the WGA strike. 2023 is an important year. Not only did it launch the WGA strike that went nearly 6 months, and happened in conjunction with the SAG strike. So the Screen Actors Guild was striking in conjunction with the WGA, joined the strike, the hard strike, within 2 months, and really shut down the industry. But it's also the year in which peak TV ended. Peak TV is the period that ran from 2013 to 2023. The term peak TV was coined by John Landgraf, who is the head of FX. But it really kind of halted the growth of TV that we saw up until that period, where every year TV output from the US for scripted program was expanding by 10, 15, 20% year over year. So that growth halted right along with the writer's strike, and we are coming back to it slowly, but we're not going to be at the numbers that we were at during peak TV, where you saw great competition for dominance, not only from Netflix, Amazon, and Apple Plus, but also companies like Peacock and Paramount Plus that were trying to find their way in that streaming universe. So where are we now? I'm recording this in 2025. We are still recovering from the TV contraction. We're seeing a lot of attention move back to features. Features are thriving, doing quite well. Yes, we are a little bit behind in the box office, but movies like Sinners certainly give us a lot of hope. We're also seeing spec move more aggressively in the marketplace, which is exciting to see. But as somebody coming into the industry, I did want you to have this information so that you understand how it impacts you, because you are coming into, if you're an emerging writer, you're coming into a living, breathing, ever-changing industry, and it's important to understand where it is, hence this little oral history. So I hope you found it helpful. If you did, kindly do subscribe. More coming at you. Super long video, but hopefully informative. Bye.